Oh, good morning. And Taylor, thank you for the introduction. You delivered it just the way I asked you to. Again, my name is Barry Smitherman, and welcome to the last day of PIVOT 2023. As Taylor said, this has been a global conference, both in person and virtual around the world, and is only appropriate that the last day would be here in Texas. And if you're looking for a morning devotional just to get started, remember the last shall be first and the first shall be last. This is Texas Day, and we are not only closing PIVOT with a highlight of Texas, but it is appropriate because Texas is the energy capital of the world, past, present, and future, and geothermal will play a big role in this. Now, like many of you, I've spent the last 3 decades in the energy space as an investment banker, as a regulator at the Public Utility Commission, which is the electricity regulator here in Texas, the Texas Railroad Commission, which I know all of you who are in the oil and gas business know it has nothing to do with railroads, but we can't get the name changed. As an investor, I've been invested in upstream, midstream utilities, as a board member, first at NRG, the big power producer here in Texas, now at CenterPoint Energy, the electric and gas delivery company here in Houston. And finally, I teach Texas energy law at the University of Texas School of Law. Now, with all of that, you'd wonder, how long have I been focused on geothermal? Well, in some ways, I'm really late to the game. Because if you'll remember, the first time the federal government began to focus on geothermal energy was in the mid-70s. It was back in the OPEC 1 and 2 energy crisis. And I can tell you as well that the last time that the Texas Railroad Commission permitted a geothermal well, until recently, was in the mid-70s. So yes, it got started some time ago, but it has been dormant for quite some time. Now, if you think about the current focus on geothermal, as well as what's happening from Washington with the Inflation Reduction Act and the benefits that are embedded in that for geothermal energy, well, I'm actually early to the game because I got started in the geothermal space about 2 years ago. The Mitchell Foundation, named for, of course, George and Cynthia Mitchell, and God rest his soul, one of the great pioneers of our industry. I think it's interesting today the Nobel Peace Prize was named, the winner was named. Really, one of these days, we're going to give it to George Mitchell for his incredible work in unlocking the mysteries and the science of fracking and horizontal drilling. But the Mitchell Foundation wanted us to begin to create an organization that would bring public awareness, education, and advocacy on behalf of the Texas geothermal industry. Now, the timing of this was really prescient because it was coming on the heels of Winter Storm Uri. If you remember, in February 2021, we were hit by Winter Storm Uri. At my house out in Dripping Springs, I had 8 inches of snow and was without power for 5 days. Temperature got down to 5 degrees. I know in Houston, it was maybe not quite that cold, but you were without power, unfortunately. It was super cold. And as a result of that, our lawmakers in Austin began to focus really for the first time on how we make electricity in Texas. How do we keep the grid stable? How do we deliver reliable energy? And that was the first crack at it in that session of 21. About the same time, the University of Texas, along with A&M, Tech, U of H, I don't want to leave any university out, was embarking on a really groundbreaking study of the geothermal resource here in Texas. The question is, do we really have the resource? And as we saw in this study, we actually do have the resource, and it's quite incredible, as should be appropriate here in Texas, where we have tremendous oil and gas resources, both in the Eagle Ford, the Permian Basin, the most prolific oil field in North America now, the Granite Wash, the Barnett, all of the oil and gas plays that we know so much about. We actually also have coal here in Texas. We've been mining coal for a long time. And we know we have wind and solar because those have made great advancements on our grid. But did we have the geothermal resource? Well, as you can see, we do. We actually have a lot of hot rock, and it generally runs from the Rio Grande between San Antonio and Corpus up around Houston to the east side of Dallas. The beauty of this is that it's close to the load centers, so it's close to where people live. That makes delivering it, if we can get it to the surface and turn it into steam, a very important consideration. So all of these issues came together in the fall of 2021. How do we address the problem that we encountered during Winter Storm Uri to have dispatchable firm electricity? How do we keep the grid sustainable? And how do we do all of this in a market design that we have here in Texas? So as we begin to think about this, geothermal began to look like that unicorn that allows us, to mix my metaphors, to thread the needle between renewable, low income, firm, and dispatchable resources. Along with a couple of other colleagues, we created the Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance. We now have about 24 companies as members of our organization, including Halliburton, and a number of the upstream oil and gas companies, the service companies, utilities like CenterPoint, power generators like Vistra, and a host of small startup geothermal companies. And when we got to the 2023 legislative session, we were ready to tell the story of Texas geothermal energy. We had a very modest legislative agenda, which I'll talk about a little bit more later in the day. But it was first and foremost to educate the 181 legislators in Austin about geothermal energy, the abundance of the resource, its ability to be dispatchable and firm, and to bring that awareness to stakeholders throughout the Texas political and educational system. So we had three things to accomplish. One, we need to clarify who owns the heat. Sounds like a simple question. Actually, it was not a simple question. It was an unresolved question here in Texas. And after a great amount of research and visiting with all of our members, talking to stakeholders, looking at the law, it seemed clear that the surface owner owns the heat. But we had to make sure we put that in the statute, so we had a bill that says surface owner owns the heat. Two, where does the jurisdiction lie regulatory-wise for geothermal energy? Well, part of it was at the Railroad Commission, and part of it was at TCEQ, and part of it may have been over at the PUC and at ERCOT. And we know that regulatory burdens are a big impediment to the development of geothermal energy. For example, we were talking to one of our members who was working on a project in California. And this is where they described to me the years that it took to get a permit to drill. And then once they got that permit, the years it took to get a permit to actually develop the above surface infrastructure. And I said, well, I've got bad news for you. It's going to take you about 3 weeks to get a permit at the Railroad Commission. We try to get it down to days, but 3 weeks is, kind of the best we can do at the moment. And then in terms of the above surface infrastructure, I don't think you need a permit from anyone in the state for that. That's the kind of regulatory light touch that we have in Texas that makes this the right place to have geothermal energy. So working with the Railroad Commission, we consolidated all the jurisdiction for geothermal energy at the Railroad Commission. And then last, we have a problem in Texas, and it's been there since my time on the Railroad Commission, as to what to do with orphaned and abandoned wells. Generally, there's about 8,000 of them. We try to plug as many as we can, but just as quickly as you plug them, you get new ones that come on to the board. So Our last legislative initiative was to allow a geothermal operator to adopt an orphaned or abandoned oil well. Great piece of legislation, great public policy. In fact, one of our members has used an abandoned oil well as a test well to determine what the geothermal resource looks like. We accomplished all of that through the entire legislative process. Now, this may sound crazy when you think about the divisions in Washington right now, but we received over 500 yes votes, committee on the floor, final passage, and 1 no vote the entire legislative session for geothermal energy. I'm still trying to figure out who the no was, because I got to go talk to that person. So we have great momentum in Texas for geothermal energy. Just a couple of the aspects that make Texas so great. One is we have this competitive wholesale market designed for electricity. It's one of the things I worked at while at the Public Utility Commission, so that the cheapest form of electricity that can be dispatched will be the one that gets on the grid. We have an opportunity with geothermal as we begin to value dispatchable energy more greatly to be dispatched early and often for geothermal. We also have all these incredible companies here in Texas, many of which have moved here recently, who want to purchase zero carbon energy, but they also want it to be 24/7. They want it to be reliable, and they're struggling with that today. And lastly, while Texas is immune to some of the issues that we see, some of the polarization in Washington, it has gotten a little bit tribal when it comes to renewable in one tribe and fossil in the other. But the beauty of geothermal is we bridge that divide. Yes, we're renewable. Yes, we're low carbon, but we're dispatchable, and we use all the skill set and the resources and over 100 years worth of knowledge in the oil and gas industry to deliver geothermal energy. So I bring it back to where I started at the beginning. Welcome to the last day of PIVOT 2023, the Texas Day, and I hope you enjoy yourself. We have a bunch of great panels and great speakers. So thank you for being here.